want to thank for the Shakarit prayers because we have had a lot of prayer requests, and one prayer request last time, I'm sure More and Mora will remember, for a girl, one of my friends' granddaughter, her name is Ivana from Australia. She was in the ICU with oxygen and all that with severe viral bronchopneumonia, but the Lord healed her, and I thank the Lord, Yeshua, and also I want to thank each one of you who prayed on in the Chakarit prayers very sincerely, and we continue to pray for her, and now she's discharged, so praise God, and she's back home. So Dr. Benjamin, conveys his thanks to you all.
It's his granddaughter.
Yes, Moray.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Would you have any words to say about what the Parsha or something today, Doctor? No?
Today's parasha, actually, I just want to say just one small word, that is, God always honors righteousness and justice. These two things, Sadaqah and Mishpat. So this is very important in the sight of Hashem, that he always honors that. And Rasha is something, wickedness is, it's not tolerated. And he, in fact, the Torah calls when Moses sees two people fighting, his Hebrew brothers, the first time that word is mentioned, Rasha. So that as he says, that person, you're violent and you're wicked and you're, he doesn't say that, but the word of God says, but he tries to stop them, but they say, who are you who can to stop us? You already killed one person. We know that. And then he gets afraid and he goes into the desert. So just wanted to share this, that let us examine ourselves. Let's do that hitbonenu and examine ourselves and ponder inside us, inside of us. Is there any unrighteousness in our hearts, in our ways? Because Christ has become our righteousness, but also that doesn't mean that we can keep on sinning and take the grace of God, the ken of God for granted. So this is something I just wanted to say. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Praise God. Wonderful. Yeah, that's so true. In putting things in perspective, it's so true, because we lead lives which are so demanding, schedules that are so demanding in life, that we tend to forget that there is a great goodness out there. There is great providence out there. And although there's forgiveness, but we tend to take a lot of things for granted. And so we overlook mishpat, we overlook sadaqah, righteousness, and we brush it aside and say, okay, let's leave everything to Yeshua. I don't have to do anything. And that's a grave mistake, I think. So we need to correct ourselves. We need to bring ourselves back into that. That's wonderful. Coming to sadaqah and righteousness, coming to what you spoke about last Friday, last year, we seen the root of the nations. We seen how the nations were the source of the life of the nations came from this point of Russia. That means they were corrupted right from the very essence of their beings. So we also understood that God had created the 70 nations, put them aside, and said that at a later time we're going to graft them back inside at a later time. And then because God gave the inheritance of the 70 nations, the going to the rest of humanity, he carved out for himself a nation, a people called Israel, and now he started working with Israel. But the reason why it took about 4 generations before Israel actually came out into its inheritance is because the world system, the essence of corruption of the soul, had to be removed from Israel. So therefore the promises, the covenants, and everything that God had given Avraham, it took the lifetime of Avraham, a certain level of rectification. and it took a lifetime of Itzhak, his rectification, a certain level of lifetime of Yaakov, his rectification. Ultimately, Yaakov resembles a person who I will talk about later. And the finality of that rectification came in through Joseph. So Joseph now has become the Mashiach. He has become the the epitome of that rectification, and he resembles the new humanity of the old world, of the Old Testament, in a way of perspective, in a way of looking at it. So Joseph is completely different from the rest of humanity. That's basically what I wanted to tell you. Completely different, and now humanity is taking on a different form of spirituality than what it was during the time of Avraham. So during the time of Avraham, in Parashat Lekha, we see the splitting of humanity. And how is humanity split? The nations have gone one way. Avraham has gone the other way. We've done this before. I've spoken about this in the Shur. And Avraham has gone, the way of righteousness, and he's walked in the commandments and promises, covenants of God. And he's come to the land of Canaan. And now he's building a people, building a nation, building a priesthood, arm segula for God's purpose on this earth. Now, it'll be very short sighted to look and try to understand that everything ends with us. It doesn't end with humanity, it doesn't end with people. The goal of everything is for humanity to be conducive for the presence of God to dwell inside, and to take that perfect light and complete it, bring it into completion. How is humanity supposed to do this? Because they are supposed to be perfect kelim, vessels. Okay, I think I've touched upon kelim also at an earlier time, much earlier time, where the light of God is perfect, but it needs vessels to bring out the beauty of that light. See, light in its form, in its structure, cannot be. It has no body. It has no form. Right? It has no form. But light can be contained. So the idea of having a physical creation, the idea of uh, creating humanity and making humanity to produce for themselves vessels of holiness, so that the light, this light that has no form, no structure, although it's perfect, it's absolutely perfect. There can be no perfection probably better than light, divine light. But that light needs to be in a vessel, much like a lantern. When we make diyas and lanterns, we carve out designs, uh, protruding windows, give it different colors. So that light that comes out from that lantern is beautiful. So you can look at a lantern from far and say, "Oh, what a beautiful lantern." So the light is deflected, and uh, the light now is being given a, a kind of beauty, a wholeness, a completeness, only because of that vessel. That's the role of humanity. That's the role for all of us. So if I think that it's only about salvation, it's only about me, it's only about humanity, that we need to come back to God. But the greater purpose is that we need to take that light like a lantern and shine it into completeness. So each one of us can be a beautiful lantern to God, and and the desire of God would be complete on this earth. So uh, it's very short-sighted to think it's about salvation and it ends with me, and that's it. That's what it's all about. I think as kids we've always sung this song in Sunday school. Uh, uh, if I remember it clearly, it was "Let your light shine go into the world and let your light shine. If I can't get the words of the song, but it's about going into this world and letting a light shine. So, but you need to be a vessel, like a beautiful lantern that gives out the beauty of that light. So, bring out light in all its aspects, colors, aspects, in everything. So, that's the role of humanity. So, the split between Avraham and the rest of humanity, which we've seen last year, now we look at the nations in one aspect, and we're looking at Israel in another aspect. So let's look at the nations first. So the nations now, from the time of Adam till the time of Abraham, God had turned his face away. He turned his face away and said, I'm not going to be partaking of the course of humanity till the time I bring about this rectification. So therefore, it was a time of almost 2000 years of complete chaos and darkness on this world. Or let's say uh, Torah or instructions, relationship with God, God's face was not shining upon humanity. It's as simple as that. And this time is very particular because now, from this essence of period of time in humanity, God branched out. He branched out Avraham. And he took out Avraham. He said, humanity is going its course, you come out. And therefore, he formed Israel out from the rest of humanity and said, okay, I'm taking you out for a purpose and for a role. That humanity, essentially, even till today, God has turned his face away from humanity unless we have the merit, the zakut, we are clean, we are holy, we are tahor, to stand before the throne of God, talk, pray, worship, what we do normally, right? That is the coming back. So that's a much later on step which has occurred. But basically, for all of humanity, God has turned his face away. So now, humanity, every soul that's coming to this world, it's coming in because it's being propagated. Souls have been propagated within the Nephesh itself. Every human being has the power to bring down or to create within itself the seed. The seed is within the human being for the Nephesh. And that Nephesh now is the animal soul that the power of which to bring out is in your and my hands. So we are either responsibly bringing out souls. But every soul that comes into this world without the knowledge of the true God, God's face is not shining on that soul. Therefore, that soul is not in the front, it's at the back. Okay? It's aher, behind God. The soul has to progress from aher to panav, to the front, okay, to face. So that journey is the process of coming back to God in Teshuvah, coming back to God in merit, and being able to stand before Him. It's a very simple concept. It's nothing very great. So the nations now are being multiplying akhir in the trail end of God's light, where light now, where the garment, the train of God's garment, the ends of it, the frills of it, this talit, if I can use a technical word, the frills of God's garment, where light now has diminished to a great extent and darkness is a lot more. So everything that's behind God has very little, very minuscule amounts of light and life, but it yet sustains all of creation. It yet sustains everything. So souls are being generated from the back, live, and they die at the back. To bring a soul in the front is bringing a soul back to the face of God. Therefore, we have the greatest prayer in Numbers 26, right? The Birkat Kohanim. May Lord bless you and keep you. May Lord cause his face to shine upon you. That is the idea of that, of the Birkat Kohanim. That humanity needs to come in the front. That front is called Sitra Akhra, the other side, or the side of darkness. All the souls that are generated from there are generated in Rasha, in evil content. It's corrupted, it's evil in its core, because when Adam and Eve sinned, Adam and Eve fell down to a level of complete corruption. And with him, all of humanity therefore had the potential now to be corrupt in its essence. So the duality of light and darkness now, humanity is gasping between light and darkness. That's at the back, but the choice is always there to come in the front. So this is where the nations are. There's nothing more to actually understand or explain anything about the nations. So nations are struggling at the back of God, much like when God told Moses, says, you cannot see my face. I will hide you in the cleft of a rock. I'll put my hand on your face, and I will pass before you. You will see my hair, my back, but you will not see my face. Till that time, Moses never had the merit to stand before God. It is much later on when God called him up to the mountain and gave him the Torah. Then he stood face to face with the presence of the Almighty God, and he merited that presence. So when he came down the mountain, it says, when he came on Har Sinai, his face was glowing. There was a transfiguration, transformation in Moses, because now it is face to face. So there's much to know about being at the back. So being at the back now, the nations are clothed in the Nephesh Behema. The Nephesh Behema, the animal soul, is very strong. It has very infinitesimal quantity of divine light, just enough to sustain life. But it does not know that light. It doesn't understand that divine light. And it's clothed in garments of impurity. When I say garments of impurity, it's clothed in darkness. It's clothed in deeds of violence, lust, greed, anger, all these things. It's on the far train end of reality and creation, much behind God. It is so far behind that God, the Eternal Father, does not even want to turn and look at it. So if he decides to turn and look at it, everything will change in a second. All the darkness will just dispel. But God uses it for an advantage. Why? Because in the darkness, in the Sitra Akhra, there is potential. There is potential because it's a place of I want to be. I can be. I can become. I can achieve. There's tremendous amount of drive at the back. There's tremendous amount of will to express and to do something. And God needs that dark place in a way so that when the souls are driving towards achieving something, the divine will allows that soul to find its path and to come in the front. So when the soul understands truth, then God facilitates, come in the front, come in the front. And this is divine providence, this is divine grace, a tremendous amount of divine grace. But for the most part of it, the darkness remains because God is using it as a seeding ground for potential. I'm just changing perspective on everybody's mind about reality and about creation, right? So that's about the nations. That's where the nations are. That's the inheritance that were given to the nations during Abraham's time, and it's still the same today. Still the same. But what about the other side? What about Avraham? When we're introduced to Lekha, God tells Abraham, Lekha, leave yourself and go. Leave your father's house, nation, country, your people. Lekha, go for your own self. Leave yourself. If you don't leave yourself, you will not start walking in the covenants and the promises that I have given you. It's for your own good. So Abraham has to leave the course of humanity, the path that humanity is on, and move away. By doing that, now Abraham has carved out many different aspects of righteousness. So righteousness now that was basically non-existent, practically non-existence in non-existence prior to Abraham. Now Abraham is suddenly a tzaddik, is a righteous person, and God counted him for righteousness, right, through faith. But for that world and that impurities to come out of Abraham, it took Abraham's lifetime, it took Yitzhak's lifetime, it took Yaakov's lifetime, and finally Joseph was the one who nailed it. So Joseph was the one who was in the deepest, darkest hole of reality in the physical sense and in the spiritual sense. And he was in Egypt, and he took this people out of Egypt. He supported them in its darkest time, okay, in Egypt, and he was the one that saved them in that darkest time. He was the light, the Mashiach. So now the separation between Goyim, the nations, and Israel is complete. It's complete. It's not complete until Joseph. Now the split is imminent, it's perfect, clear distinction between the two. So therefore, although God created one humanity, everybody is the same. Flesh, blood, DNA, all humanity is the same. The Jew and the Gentile is one people. We all created the same. But yet there is a fundamental difference between the two. I want you to understand this very clearly. It's got nothing to do with DNA. It's got nothing to do that I've got a J group and you got an L group and I got an M group and all this haplogroup and all that nonsense. Got nothing to do with all of that. It is the spiritual righteousness that has been separated from the rest of humanity that the children of Israel have been carved into. That is the difference. So therefore, now if I look and think and I try to understand that years down the line, when Yeshua came into this world and he done what he had to do, the first point of rectification had to be Israel, because that is the inheritance of Israel. Israel had to be rectified, and until Israel is not fully rectified, there is no chance of the world. There's no chance. There's no chance, friends. Israel has to be fully rectified. But what the world does not understand is that the role of Yaakov and Esau. We've studied this before. In Esau, there is Yeshua. Okay, Yeshua is not with Yaakov; he is with Esau. So the rectification of the world must needs be becoming right now at this point of time, because Yeshua is working with the world. But the world is not able to understand that light. The Jew understands what it is to be a kelim, a vessel to contain that light. The ones who are grafted in does not understand that. Therefore, a Jew becomes very surprised when he sees one from the nations operating in light, doing all those things by faith and miracles and all those testimonies, and he's wondering how. But he's also looking at the person from the nation saying, this person is not a kelim, he's not a pure vessel. How is that happening? How is it happening? We have to learn to take that light and complete it. So the training in the Torah, the training in understanding what righteousness truly is, because the righteousness that Yeshua displayed, Adonai Tzidkenu, the Lord of our righteousness, is because he is the perfection of the Torah. He is the perfect utilization of the Torah. So when I look at Yeshua, I see that the Torah has been lived perfectly. That's what I need to do. I have to become a kelim. I have to become a vessel of purity and honor and glory. Then I can be like a lamp, like a lantern, taking that perfect light and giving it a holiness and a completion. Like a lantern that is glowing in the dark, but it's beautiful to look at. That is the role. It does not end with you, friends. It ends. The goal is that light. That light must shine in that darkness. That light must be resplendent. And that resplendence is called Zohar in Hebrew. Zohar. Okay. It has to have resplendency coming out of you. That is the goal of everything. Even salvation is a part of that process to bring you to that perfection and that place of perfection where divine light now is completely emanating out of you. That's the goal of everything, my friends. And I don't think this thought is very much in our Christian circles because uh, we've never really understood Torah. We never really delved into the depth of what God really wants for each one of us, right? Never, never. So today, I think we're exposed to, and we are learning now, very much we're learning the essence of why are we doing this? What is this all about? What is this all about? Okay, so coming back basically to Avraham, and now in Lekha, when I said that Avraham moved away, he changed path from the rest of humanity. And when he changed path from the rest of humanity, the righteousness that Avraham started uh, generating inside of him, emanating from him, now brought many, many levels of walking with God. Now, suddenly, humanity now is not one course, Russia. There is Russia, and there is also Hatova. There's Russia and there's Tova. There's goodness and there's evilness. So the Tova now has suddenly is in this rectification mode. So therefore, there is a commentary in among the sages. There's a commentary among the sages, specifically written in the Mishnah and the Talmud, and commented on in the Gemara, which is the commentary on the Talmud, in Seder Berakhot. Okay, in Berakhot, I think it's in 70 day. It talks about the 5 types of people, the 5 types of human beings that basically are considered righteous in the sight of God. 5 types. Okay. And we should closely examine these 5 types. It's very hard to pinpoint because this does not talk to us about the nations. We know the nations are Russia. That's it. That's it. They may have degrees of darkness and impurities, that's a different thing. But the categorization of humanity, that's it. They all rush out. But when it comes to the side of righteousness and Israel, now we have five types. Let's study what these five types are. So based on the Mishnah and the Talmud, and on that, I'm putting this into perspective so you and me understand this in New Testament terms, friends. Okay, please, please bear with me. Understand where I'm going with all of this. The Alter Rebbe, Shneur Zalman of Liadi, he in his work Tanya, okay, commented, and he started his work in Likutei Umrim in a very beautiful way. He started with this because I think it's profound because he's giving us the distinction of the nations and of Israel. The complete bifurcation between the two, although they're same, but yet there is a difference. Okay, so I cannot say that I'm a human and I don't know what a Jew is. He's a human too. They're human, same blood, same everything. We all humanity, but there is a distinction in the spiritual aspect of the Jew that is different from the humanity. Let's see what Lekha Ambrim says, and I'll try and connect it for you guys. Okay, he says, he puts a commentary. The Alter Rebbe puts a commentary. He says, we find in the Gemara 5 distinct types of righteous people. So he's talking this in context of Israel now, not in context of the nations. Okay, please understand this. Number 1, he says a righteous man who prospers. So you have a children of a son of Israel, a Jew. He's on the righteous path and he prospers spiritually, materially, everything. He prospers as a soul. The second category, it says a righteous man who suffers. The third category is a wicked man who prospers and a wicked man who suffers. And there is a fifth category, okay, he says, who's called a Benoni, an intermediate person. Now, Benoni is somebody who's neither righteous, neither is he a Sadiq, neither is he a Rasha. He's in between and he's struggling somewhere in between. Contextually, again, I'm saying this is all within covenant. Okay, it's not outside covenant. We're talking now within covenant. Okay, because this covenant now brings out Israel. Israel brings out the Messiah. The Messiah, Yeshua, does what he has to do, and now through Yeshua, he's crafting the nations in. So it's very important to understand this. So the Benoni, he says, is an intermediate person. It is explained that the righteous man who prospers is the perfect Sadiq. He is the Sadiq of the highest level of perfection. The imperfect Sadiq, the righteous man who suffers, is the imperfect Sadiq. So this, I think, parallels between King Mashiach and servant Mashiach. If the children of Israel merited the perfect Sadiq, they would have got King Messiah. They never merited that, so they got the suffering Messiah. So you have the suffering Sadiq, the imperfect Sadiq, and you have the King Sadiq, the perfect Sadiq. So who comes first? Does this world, or does the children of Israel or the Jewish people deserve King Messiah, or they deserve a suffering Messiah? That is something the children of Israel have to answer themselves, because the day they answer that, then they will realize who they've missed out and why they've missed out, what are they thinking, and where they have fallen short. They need to answer this themselves. But we need to facilitate this and tell them, listen, you'll know this. You'll know what it is all about. Introspect, reflect, find out what has gone wrong. Okay, so the imperfect Sadiq, okay, the righteous man who suffers, the Sadiq who suffers is the one whose evil nature is subservient to the good nature. The righteous man who suffers, the righteous Sadiq who suffers, his evil nature, the Rasha, the Yetzar Hara, the evil nature or the evil inclination, is subservient to the good nature inside of him. That means he's having trouble and suffering because he's constantly beating the evil nature out of him. He's struggling. Much like Paul says, he says, he says, I pound myself. He says, I bash myself spiritually to keep myself in trim. Therefore, all of us, to some extent, in covenant, are Sadiqs who suffer. Sadiqs who suffer. Okay, the imperfect Sadiqs. So we cannot say that we are perfect, but imperfect Sadiqs. But the Sadiq who prospers, now it's at a different level altogether. So how does one become? Esther, can you put your mic off, please? Thank you. How does one become or transform from a Sadiq who suffers to a Sadiq that prospers? Okay, that is the question. That is the process. That's what we need to answer. Okay, let's go ahead. In Berakot, I was right, in chapter 9 in Berakot in Gemara, it's stated that the righteous are judged by their good nature. It's a profound statement, very profound. The righteous are judged by their good nature. Don't think that I'm a perfect Sadiq and my life is perfectly good. I have no problems in life. I have nothing, absolutely nothing to indict me with. I am perfect in the sight of God. Even that perfection must be judged before God. God will look at the good deeds and judge it, and he will remove merit for those good deeds and say, this is what you deserve according to your deeds. So even the good inside of you will be judged. You must go through judgment. You and me must go through judgment. We are of the understanding that, I'm going to be judged because I've done all the wrong things in the world. Great. I know you're going to be judged and I'm going to be judged for the bad things. But friends, you're going to be judged for the good things you do also. You're going to be evaluated, you're going to be assessed, you're going to be audited, and all the good things that you've done are going to be put out on a table and say, this could have been done better, you've done this is the merit for that, this is the profit for this is your gift for that. That's it. But it is going to be assessed and going to be judged. So don't think by being good, you're not going to be judged. You are going to be judged. You're going to be judged by the greatness and the quantity of the goodness that you have done. Everything must have judgment. The good and the bad, both. The good are judged by the good nature. The wicked will be judged by the evil nature. It just depends where you want to be. You want to be in the evil part of it and be judgment. What is your merit? And what are you going to earn from that? Death, destruction. culmination of life, or whatever, Gehenna or hell or fire, whatever you want to say. But if you choose to be good, you will still be judged. You'll still be audited. You'll still be assessed. But you will get the relevant profit, or you'll get the relevant things that God wants to give you for that. Judgment is there. So he says that the judge is good by the good nature, the evil is judged by the evil nature, while the Benoni, the intermediate person, okay, are going to be judged by both. This is amazing now. Now it makes your and my life very complex, extremely complex. So how are we going to be judged by both? For the good that I do, God is going to assess. The bad that I do, God is still going to look and say, okay, you've done this bad. You've done this good, you've done this bad. I'm being indicted and I'm being accused by the accuser of Satan on this side. Whereas on this side, my Lord is acclaiming me. Where do I gain more merit? Where is my weightage more? If I fall short of that, I better have my Lord standing at the side of me and saying, okay, I take control. I take spiritual guarantee. I take charge. I will atone. I will cleanse. Come. So in many ways, you and me are Benoni. Forget being imperfect Sadiqs. Forget being a perfect Sadiq. Forget all that. We are Benonis in many ways. How does this play out in the life of Avraham? How does this play out in the children of Israel? All this we're talking is covenant. It's not talking about the nations now. Okay. The Rebbe is very specifically talking in context of Israel. I think he quotes the book of Job also, when he says, Master of the universe, you have created the righteous men and you have created the wicked men too. For it is not preordained whether a man shall be righteous or wicked. I don't know the verse in Job. If I do find this verse, I will share it with you all. Because the verse is not mentioned out here, it's only the Gemara which has been referenced. It is necessary to understand the essential nature of the rank of the Benoni. Surely that cannot mean that one whose deeds are half virtuous and half sinful. For if this was so, how can you judge somebody? How can you judge somebody? I mean, you'll be balanced out. So if you're 50% good and 50% evil, what's going to be the end result of it? The acquisition has to happen either way. The bad has to acquire the good, or the good has to acquire the bad. This is where Yeshua comes into play. He has to be there. He has to acquire and remove out the Rasha from inside of you and acquire you completely on the other side, friends. Completely. He says, furthermore, at what stage can a person be considered a Benoni? When a man commits a sin, he is deemed completely wicked. Even the smallest of the aberration, or the smallest of the negligence, or the smallest of the rebellion against God is the greatest sin. So even that smallest sin makes you fully Rasha. You cannot say that I'm only Rasha in a small area. No, you are Rasha. There are no gray areas with this. So the smallest of good, can it be called so that even the smallest good inside a Rasha person makes that person fully good? But whereas The smallest of sin in a good person makes the person fully sin. Does it work both ways? No, it does not work both ways, my friends. This is what he's trying to explain out here. He says, when a man commits sins, he is deemed completely wicked. But when he repents afterwards, he is deemed completely righteous. Even he who violates minor prohibition is called wicked and is stated in Yavamoto. He is quoting portions of the sages and of the Mishnah. Moreover, when even he who has the opportunity to forewarn another against sinning and does not do so is called wicked. All the more so he who neglects any positive commandment of God which he is able to fulfill. For instance, when he is able to study the Torah and to pray, but he does not do it, then he is already confirmed to be called Rasha in its own way. Now, this Benoni is a very interesting word. It's a very interesting word. And as for the general saying, the one whose deeds and misdeeds are equally balanced is called Benoni, while he whose virtues outweigh his sins are called a Sadiq. This is only figurative use of the term in regard to reward and punishment, because he is judged according to the majority of his acts and he is deemed righteous in his verdict since he is acquitted in the law. But concerning the true definition and equality of the distinct levels and ranks, righteous and intermediate, our sages have remarked that our righteous are motivated solely by their good nature. Like King David says in 22 in Psalms 109 verse 22, he says, and my heart is a void within me. I have completely devoided my heart, removed all the wickedness, all the Rashaness from my heart. I have completely removed. How has he done this? That is the void of an evil nature, because David had slain it through fasting and prayer. But whoever has not attained this degree, even though his virtues exceed his sins, cannot at all be reckoned to have ascended to the rank of the Sadiq. So he's saying, in simple terms, you may do all the tzedakah in this world, you may be absolutely good in this world, but if you've not removed the evil Rasha and the evil inclination, if you have not subdued the evil inclination inside of you, you cannot be called a Sadiq that prospers. You will be called a Sadiq that suffers. Therefore, it says he saw that the righteous were so few, he planted them in every generation. 24. Okay. Proverbs 10:25. I'm just quoting his footnotes. In Proverbs 10:25, it says that Sadiq is the foundation of the world. The foundation of the world. Then explanation of this is found in the light of what Rabbi Chaim Vital wrote in Shar HaKashidim. It's a different rabbi who wrote something. He says now, and he quotes Isaiah 26. Isaiah, where is it? 26. In Isaiah, I think 57:16. He says that in every Jew, now mind you, I'm talking in context. So when I'm using the word in every Jew, I'm also talking about those who are grafted into the covenant through Yeshua. Okay. So please think of covenant. We're not talking about the world out here. We're talking about being in covenant. You and we are walking in covenant now. Read it. That's it. It's as simple as that. It's not that we're not walking in covenant. We are walking in covenant with God. The day I decided to follow Yeshua and to come into faith, I am walking in covenant. My crafting is in process, or either I have reached a certain level. Therefore, when I use the word Yahudi or Jew, I mean that you also are now grafted into this covenant, and you're not of this world. So it says that in every Jew, whether righteous or wicked, are two souls, as it is written, the the souls which I have made, the souls that I have made, in Isaiah 57:16. In Isaiah 57:16, God says, I will not pressurize the human being anymore, or the souls that I have made will fail before me. Will fail before me. That means the souls now will will fall in life, and it'll wither away and it'll diminish completely. Therefore, God has to nurture it. Whether the soul is in the front, is nurtured by the face, or whether the soul is at the back, is nurtured by even a little minuscule amount of divine light, but the soul needs to still be alive, even in the darkest places. The For the souls that I have made, alluding to two souls, there is one soul which originates in the shell, in the klipa, in the sitra akhra at the back, which I spoke to you much earlier about, where a soul is being generated in the back of God, in the darkness that you and me are bringing out into this world. Every child that we bring to this world is coming out in the nephesh, because the nephesh now is growing in this darkness, does not know God, does not know God. The neshama, the breath of life that comes from God, now is in exile in that child. It needs to be nurtured. It needs to be brought into completion. Therefore, the duties of the parents is to not to bring children into this world and to grow them up and teach them business and make them and for them train them to become a doctor and to become a lawyer. That's not the role of a parent. The role of a parent, now listen, is when they bring down a soul, is to nurture the neshama, the divine soul in the child. So the child now learns to not become a Benoni, but learns that to subdue the evil nature, the Nephesh Habehema, the animal soul, and for it to be in subjection to the Neshama, the divine soul. And that is the greatest training you can give your children. The greatest training you can give your children. So the soul that is in the Sitra Akra at the back, which is clothed in the blood of a human being, given life to the body, as is written, for the life of the flesh is in the blood. In the book of Leviticus, it says, blood I've given you to be on the altar. Do not drink the blood, because the life of the nephesh is in the blood. This is this animal soul that you and me can procreate and bring into this world. Biological, flesh, blood, DNA, everything put together. And this animal soul, it sleeps, eats, drinks, procreates, does everything. From the soul stems all the rasha and evil characteristics of creation as the human being, because it's composed of all the elements of impurity, the elements of physical creation: air, water, fire, earth. All of these four now have their own classifications of of uh, of bringing forth rasha and evil into this world. So he goes on to give each of these elements of physical creation, how it affects the evil inside that nephesh, that needs to be rectified. Okay. Ultimately, all this nephesh now has to be brought under subjection of the neshama, and the neshama now has to exert control. The divine soul has to exert control on the nephesh and lift the nephesh into glory by transforming it, transfiguring it, making it shalom, making it whole, making it perfect, and taking it up. So he's saying now, okay, he's saying, from this stems all the evil characteristics deriving from the four elements, evil elements which are contained in it. There are anger and pride, which emanate from the element of fire, the nature of which is to rise upward, the appetite for pleasures from the element of water, for water makes to grow all kinds of enjoyment, frivolity and scoffing, boasting and idle talk from the element of air. Uh, yeah, enjoyment, okay. Frivolity and scoffing and boasting and idle talk from the element of air, and sloth and melancholy from the element of earth, laziness. From this soul also stems all the good characteristics that are to be found in the innate nature of all Israel. So he's saying that, now listen, from Israel also has the Nephesh, okay, but they've been empowered in the Neshama to take charge and control of the Nephesh. This was the Torah that was given to Moses to tell them that they need to work and to bring the Nephesh Behema, to shecht it, to slaughter the animal soul inside of them, put it on the altar, and to live a perfect Korban Khai before God, a living sacrifice before God. For in the case of Israel, the soul of the Klippa is derived from the Klippa Nuga. Now, the difference he's giving you between the Jew and the nations is this. Essentially, both are the same, except for the Klippa that is covering the Jew and the Klippa that's covering the nations are different. The Klippa that's covering the Jew now is a Klippa that is called a Klippa Noga. Noga from the word Nagwa, which is illumination. Something that's illumined. Illumination, that's Noga. So it's like the shell that shines, that emits a kind of glistening light. Okay, so he's saying the Jew should be a person who has shechted his animal soul and who's a vessel that is able to emanate a certain count of glistening in his spiritual body, his klipa. Whereas the nations do not have that. They have the klipa, but the klipa is a hard case, dark shell that needs to be circumcised. It needs to be broken, torn apart, and needs to be circumcised. Whereas the Jew has been given the covenant of circumcision, therefore he's supposed to be a klipa noga. And the reason of the klipa noga, the light of that klipa with the Jew, is because he's been given the Torah to function and to do the Torah, and the Torah is the thing that is rectifying the Jew. Much like what Yeshua came, he took the entire Torah, he perfected it, and he resurrected it. And therefore, when he resurrected it, everything was perfected. When he was on Mount Tabor, the Mount of Transfiguration, it says his body and his garments were glistening white. Right? Do you remember this? White. They could not, Peter and John could not see. They closed their eyes. They said, we cannot even bear to see that light. He was glowing, that light. That's what we're talking about. So the perfect Jew has to be like that, like what Yeshua is. He is the Sadiq that prospers. But what did Israel merit? They merited the Sadiq that suffers. So therefore, Yeshua also is like Joseph. The Sadiq, the perfect Sadiq that suffers, but at the same time, he resembles also the perfect Sadiq that prospers. Joseph also prospered. He suffered and he prospered. Yeshua suffered, today he is prospering. Therefore, Joseph in the Old Testament is kind of, spoken about the Messiah. He's spoken about the foreshadow of the Messiah of the Old Testament. Now, Rebbe says something out here. He says, the Torah that is given to the Jew for this circumcision of the klipa and the glistening of his klipa, of his shell, that's protecting his inner etsem, okay, is derived from the klipa noga, which is also contains good, as it originates in the esoteric tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That means he's saying that the Torah itself is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Listen carefully to what I'm saying. It's very important. Eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Through that, if you are able to draw truth from the Torah, you will glisten. Why were the children of Israel not being able to achieve what Yeshua achieved? Because they were drawing from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They were not able to keep it. Yeshua came and kept it perfectly. And today, because he has kept it perfectly, we are able through him and only through him only, we are able to partake of that tree. And that understand the good, know what the evil is, and yet keep it under subjection and keep it. So the souls of the nations of the world, however, emanate from the other unclean klipa, which contains no good at all whatsoever, as it is written, okay, that all the good of the nations done is from selfish motives. So the Gemara comments on this verse saying the kindness of the nations is sin. That all the charity and kindness done by the nations of the world is only for their own selfish glorification, and so on and so on. I can keep going on. He is profound, absolutely profound. It's really amazing what he's written in Tanya. When I look at Benoni, the intermediate person that you and me are struggling with, right? The word Benoni, I researched this in Bereshit 35, in chapter 35, in verse 18, when Rachel is giving birth to Binyamin, okay, the last of the sons. She had two children. She had Joseph and Binyamin. She gave birth to both of them, and she died giving birth to Binyamin. In verse 18, what did she call the child? She calls the child Ben Oni, son of my pain. Ben Oni. Now it's two words with a Makhef. Ben, Makhef, Oni. So you have Bet Nun with a Segol, and Aleph, Vav, Cholem Vav, Nun, Kirik Yod. Ben Oni. And this resembles the word Benoni, which we are talking about, the intermediate person. Who is this intermediate person? If I remove the Makef and I conjunct these two words together, the Ben, the son, and Oni of pain, I have to change the Nikud because of that. The laws of conjunction tells me that I have to change the conjunction. Then I have to remove the Segol. The Segol becomes, the Bet is not a prefix, it's a word. So then Because with being a word, it's not a prefix, I have to remove the segol and put a kirik over there. And then the kirik now with the yod becomes binoni. So essentially it's the same word. When I'm conjuncting it, I'm removing the aleph, it becomes binoni, binoni. Ben Oni becomes binoni, an intermediate person. Now it's very interesting. What is Rachel calling Benjamin, Benjamin or Benjamin, Ben Oni with the aleph? But Benoni is without the aleph. It's Benoni. And then she names him Benoni, Ben Oni, but then subsequently his name was changed to Benjamin, son of the south, or son of my right hand. Benoni. So we have Joseph now, who's like the Mashiach, who's like the Sadiq that prospers, and the Sadiq who suffers and the Sadiq who prospers. Whereas we have Binyamin, who is his brother, who he loves very much, right? You know the story, right? Who is a Benoni, who's an intermediate. And he's the one who's bridging the gap between Joseph, who belongs to Egypt, while he himself, being a Jew, is one of the brothers to the other 10 brothers. So he's caught between the two. He's caught between the Jew, and he's caught between what Mashiach Yosef stands for. Much like the messianic kind of congregation of today. I find it really interesting when I see the different levels of messianic congregations. Some of them call themselves messianic, but they're very Christian in the outlook, whereas some of them are very Jewish in the outlook, and they look down upon the. There's a whole lot of nonsense with the messianic community. They basically they're a confused lot. They don't know whether they want to be Jewish or they want to be Christian. So this is Benoni, Binyamin, Ben Oni, friends, and this gives us a foreshadow of what Rachel was saying. Therefore, she's seen it at the time of giving birth. She's seen, right? She's seen what the world was producing, what the world is going to become like. But all this in context of covenant, only for Israel. So the different levels of the righteous people. So if I want to look at the righteous who prospers, is first the righteous who suffers, Joseph, the Benoni, Binyamin. Who is the Rasha who prospers? And who's the Rasha that suffers? I can take many names in that. Rachel, righteous person who suffers. Rasha, Leah, just who prospers. A whole lot of life is the Torah is so complex in its outlook when you look at all these things, friend. So there is a distinct difference between being grafted into Israel and being part of Israel, or being Israel, because we're not like the nations, friends. We're just not like the nations. Whereas the nations, their root, their source, their path, their inheritance is very different. They're not before God. Why are you and we have got the ability to stand and to pray? Stand boldly before the throne of grace and to pray and to plead and to ask God, right? It's because of this. So let us reflect. Let us understand. The reason why I'm doing all this through all these parshas is because we have to know truth, what the Bible's all about. What is the inheritance of the nations? What's the inheritance of Israel? What is Israel? Who is Israel? What do they stand for? And if we don't understand these fundamentals, it's going to be very difficult, friends, to understand spiritually. This is only, I keep telling you these things because to strengthen all of you, to strengthen us spiritually. Friends. So let's reflect. Let's try and understand what God is trying to do with this world right from the beginning. There was something God was trying to do, but slowly, God is opening eyes to understand and to show us this is what He's doing with the nations. This is what He's doing with Israel. This is why He's chosen these people. This is the role. This is the merit. This is the end goal. This is what's going to happen. The end goal is I have to be able to be a vessel holy, sanctified, to take the divine light and to complete my mission of what God wants me to be. A beautiful vessel before God. Second Timothy chapter 2 verses it says, in a great mansion there are many vessels. Some of gold, silver, wood, stone, whatever, each one to honor and to dishonor. But we have to become vessels. We have to become vessels of honor to God, friends. So please reflect on these things. Think about what we studied today. Think about what we learned. Think about these things. These are very deep topics. I don't know till what depth each one of you all are thinking, reflecting, learning Torah. I don't know. But I request all of you all, please reflect properly. Learn. It's not only about understanding, but it's about changing your lives. It's about application. It's about knowing who you are. It's about changing yourself. Knowing who you are. So God bless each one of you all. Take care. Enjoy yourselves. Have a lovely Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom to all of you all. And I think we're starting the session today, the Hebrew session now after this. So I'm going to hand over to all. We just got about 5 minutes. If anybody wants to say something, let me go ahead.